Hi, welcome to Ardor 2 Devlog 6. Last time, I said I would keep making enemies and bosses, and start prototyping the second playable character. Well, I started prototyping her, and I kept prototyping her, and I may have just gone and finished her all the way. This is Lilac. Her deal is that she is a laser revolver and puts down mirrors to reflect it. Shooting a laser with lots of bounces gives you a big combo for lots of damage. I'd like to talk about how I made her, start to finish. I have a pipeline for making new stuff in my game, and Lilac is a good showcase for the whole process. So, let's wind the clock back to when I started. The first step is always figuring out what you want to make. So far this game is about moving to land attacks while dodging the enemies. As I sat down to make a whole new character, I knew I wanted more than that. I remembered this board game from when I was little called Ket. It was like chess, but both players had a laser, and you killed pieces by reflecting the laser into them. I decided this would be my inspiration for Lilac's deck. So, she'll have a laser gun and put mirrors in the arena. I know I want the player to make cool reflect shots and use mirrors a lot, so I need to encourage that. If the laser does good damage without mirrors, you could play boringly. You'd just fire it straight and not bother with mirrors, over and over. So, I decided the laser would do very little damage on its own. But every time it pierces through a target or bounces off a mirror, its damage doubles. Lilac is all about fancy trick shots, with the laser bouncing all over the place. It's really fun to set up insane shots, but it also takes time and effort. This deck requires a lot of thinking just for one attack, which could be fussy and annoying. The crazy damage scaling is there to justify your effort and give you exciting payoff. I had all this stuff pretty figured out in my head before I sat down and started coding. I didn't make any visuals yet, cause stuff could still change, and I didn't want to waste time on art for stuff that I might throw out. I didn't have to iterate too much though. The one bit of her design that did change was the mirror shape. Originally, it was triangular. I thought that would be cool, because you could bounce off the flat sides while splitting the beam when you hit an edge. It was fussy though. The mirrors require a lot of clicking to get them right, so the experience of clicking on them needs to be easy and simple. In the end, it felt better to keep them as flat panes. If you click 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 on a mirror to rotate it a bunch, it feels right for the laser to keep sweeping clockwise in the direction you're clicking. Flat mirrors satisfy that expectation, while the triangle mirrors frustrate it. If something's unintuitive, or it's a struggle just to make it behave, your brain doesn't like it. Complicating something can add depth, but it also adds friction. You want to be very careful about where to add friction in a game. In my case, I want the friction to come from the enemies and their abilities, not getting your character to do what you want. I'm trying to make a game where it just feels good to click on stuff. I polish the player's abilities as much as I can, because I want them to be satisfying and reliable tools that people like using. Figuring out the mirrors was the only real speed bump when implementing my ideas. Now that Lilac's mechanics are all working, I need art. I figured out her character design in Procreate, then made her in Blender with a mix of kit bashing and modeling. I did use assets as part of her model, and actually, let's talk about assets for a moment. They can be good, but I believe you should avoid assets that you couldn't make yourself. There's an idea that with modern asset stores, indies can have fancy graphics despite having low budgets. Assets look generic though. By definition, they have to fit in with lots of games. Sooner or later, you're going to want to have unique art, like for your main character, for example. If your game's art direction is set by expensive assets you couldn't make yourself, you won't be able to make something good enough to fit in with them. Assets can still be very helpful, of course, especially for someone like me, who has a day job and limited time. I could model all this stuff from scratch, but it would take precious time. So, I started with a base mesh to establish proportions and provide skin texture. The revolver and the boots and the helmet are assets I bought and sewed into the mesh. I created a high poly version of her clothes and sculpted some detail, and then baked it down into the normal map. At this point, I thought I'd have cloth physics in-game, so I didn't sculpt wrinkles like I should have. I later decided cloth physics was overkill, and not worth the performance cost, so the coat is kind of just a big flat sheet. This is all for a model that will be tiny on screen, so it's like mostly fine though. Hopefully. Probably? Once I had a model that looked nice enough for card art and renders, I made a simple low poly version for in-game. So, I have a mesh, but it can't move. Time for rigging. I use Rigify for Blender, where you place a basic skeleton, then Rigify makes a nice control rig. The only problem is Rigify is bad for game characters. The control rig uses a lot of Blender constraints that help it do its thing, but don't transfer well into Godot. It also has a ton of bones, which is bad for performance. Enter Game Rig Tools, a great Blender add-on. You feed it your model, a Rigify control rig, and the humanoid skeleton you originally created. It swaps the model from the fancy control rig to the simple skeleton, then binds the skeleton to do what the control rig does. Now I can do my animations in Blender with the nice rig, but when I export to Godot, we only send the simple skeleton. It's the best of both worlds. This is how I always rig my characters, but Lilac is special. She also has a coat. Just like how the control rig puppets her body's bones, I set up a Bezier curve system to puppet her coat's bones. The simple skeleton has chains of coat bones which follow the curves. This was good enough to get by, but next time I do this, I want to find a different solution. I had the upper parts of the coat bound to her skeleton, so as she moved her shoulders or arms, it would move with them. But it was hard to make a nice looking transition to the lower part where the coat would have its own bones, and whenever you change her pose, you have to then go and fix the coat. The coat rig is annoying to deal with, and the results are kinda mid. I like the coat on shoulders look, but part of why it works is the different ways the coat can hang. Draped down concealing an arm, or falling away when it raises. That's the style. Lilac on the other hand has a coat edge always glued to her arm, which is ugh. It's kind of good enough, and the work required to remodel and re-rig and try something else would be a lot, and again, all of this is for a tiny character on screen. I decided to accept this as final, but it's the weakest part of her look. So, I finally had her in-game, moving and shooting. Now I just had to figure out what the mirrors would look like. Something I like about hexes is how they're made of triangles, and previously I'd thought about making a small D4-shaped tetrahedron character, who rolls around among the hexes. I used that idea for the mirror base. 3 little tetrahedrons sit together, holding the mirror. The actual mirror pane spins quickly when you click it, which is faster than the base's roll animation. I made a tri-corner gear assembly that turns based on the difference in their rotation. Up till now, attacks always created blood splatter, which meant that my mirrors could bleed. I changed that to glass shard particles, with some rigid body physics for death. The biggest challenge making Lilac was one I didn't expect, the laser bounce simulation. The obvious way to do it is to just actually simulate reflection. We detect when the laser hits a mirror, calculate the reflect angle, and send it off in the new direction. That would work if the mirror panes were infinitely thin, but they aren't. The place where the bounce happens isn't actually in the center of the hex. It's on the surface of the mirror, which is off-center. That means that if we simulate reflection honestly, the laser will go off-center, and it will get worse and worse every bounce. The problem becomes very apparent if we thicken the mirrors. The whole appeal of Lilac is multi-bounce trick shots, so I knew I needed to get this right. The easy fix is to not simulate the laser at all. Determine what mirrors and enemies it ought to hit, and figure out the perfect bounce positions in the center of each mirror pane. Then we just draw the laser from point to point. This would work, but it still wasn't good enough. I want the laser to sweep across when Lilac spins, so the laser needs to actually fire out of her revolver, not just connect point to point. If there was a mirror in the back, not involved by the current shot, I still want the laser to reflect off it. There needs to be some simulation happening. So, here's the approach. When previewing a laser shot, we first figure out what hexes will be hit. Worst case scenario, if there's ever a bug with the laser bouncing wrong, that should be a purely visual bug. The actual damage ought to still happen correctly. Before we worry about drawing any laser bounces, I create a list of hexes the laser will hit and lock it in. Now that we know which mirrors will be involved, we calculate the perfect bounce points. We're not going to enforce these on the laser directly, because we'd get the weird bending effect. What we do with them is, we figure out, if the laser bounced from point to point perfectly, what angles would those reflections be? And then we talk to the mirrors. We tell each one, hey, so you're gonna have a laser hit you. Take this angle adjustment and add it to your reflect calculations. And then we stand back and fire the laser, and it bounces around. Each mirror will apply that little nudge we gave it, which points the laser to the center of the next mirror. If a mirror isn't involved in this shot, then its angle nudge is 0, and just reflects normally. We can have our cake and eat it too. The laser sweeps around the arena, looking nice, but stays accurate when aiming. Like, this right here would be way off if we didn't step in and fix it. If all goes well, the player won't notice any of this. It takes a lot of smoke and mirrors just to make the laser behave the way you'd expect. The rest of Lilac's polish went pretty smoothly. For designing sounds, I started using the method Mark Brown describes in developing, where you put gameplay footage into a video editor and you put your component sound effects over it so you can fine-tune a new sound right into your game, but without having to constantly export it and test it in-game. This is also when I made Lilac's arena. I really ought to have considered what it'd look like while I was designing her. I just forgot. It was honestly kinda hard to pick colors, especially for the board. I'd already made so much VFX and UI based on the first arena, and everything was tuned to look good on it. If I made Lilac's board much darker or lighter, it would mess things up. And no matter which arena you're in, the dominant color on the board is usually going to be red for damage hexes. So I'm restricted to colors that look good against red, but also work with green, because green is how I signal movement. The blue I had already used felt like kinda the best choice, and anything else would be just worse. But I do need different colors. Lilac's arena is supposed to look distinct. I mean, the game needs more than one color palette. There's only going to be 3 arenas, one for each character. So whatever I do, it better be good, because it's going to be on screen a lot. Lilac's dominant color is purple, so to complement it, I figured I should go with green. I had made terrain and texture painted it, and was putting it in game, when I happened to disable the color while the ambient occlusion map was still active. Suddenly the ground looked like snow, and I realized that's what I should go with. Now that I had a look I liked, I could focus on executing it, and that was easier. I still used green for the board, but a bluish shade. I'm satisfied with how it turned out. I went a bit fancier with the card art this time around. I used the same render painting workflow as before, but added lenticular effects to the cards and a laser when you're aiming. Earlier in my character brainstorming, I'd thought about making a character with a ghost double that they're always swapping between, and I'd thought, when I make that, there'll be a lot of good poses to use for having two of a character posing with themselves framed in the card. Then when I was making these laser cards, I had the idea of the laser aiming and the lenticular effects, and I decided to go for it. Having two lilacs in the art is a little silly. The mirror theming does kind of make sense for it, also, but only kind of. But my plans for the next character don't currently involve the ghost double idea, so I'm not undermining anything. And speaking of the next character, once Lilac was fully playable, I excitedly sat down and played through the levels I've made so far with Lilac instead, and I found that the balance was all over the place. Most of the levels were too easy. The damage doubling makes Lilac very strong, if you're playing well. But you're also kind of weaker, because you need to make good mirror shots happen, and if you're dealt a bad hand, that can be hard. One level was basically impossible. It's the one with the number debuff enemy that reduces all your card numbers by 1. The lasers are already low damage, so here, now they do almost nothing, and the rest of your cards are also nerfed, so it's really hard to get mirrors where you need them. It was bad. I could rebalance this stuff now, but I don't think I will. The third character will also have new mechanics that might require further changes. Originally, I was going to wait to make another character, but now I don't want to work on any new levels until I do. I need to balance levels and bosses with all 3 characters in mind. Therefore, I need to nail down what the third character even is. So, that's what's up next. I'm about to go through this whole cycle one more time. If you'd like to follow Ardor 2's development, subscribe to my channel. And if you'd like to join playtests in the future, there's a beta sign up in the description. Hopefully this video has been interesting, and hopefully I'll have a shiny new character to show next time. See you then.